The evening sky had turned a deep purple as Judge Anthony Carter gathered his papers. The courthouse had emptied hours ago, but he'd stayed behind, reviewing cases for tomorrow's hearings. At 58, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes that had seen too much, Judge Carter had spent over 2 decades on the federal bench. His colleagues respected him not just for his sharp legal mind, but for his unwavering fairness. "Good night. Ray?" he called to the night security guard as he pushed through the heavy doors. "Working late again, Judge?" Ray smiled, shaking his head. "You know, they do let you go home sometimes." Judge Carter laughed. "Just being thorough. Have a good night." The parking garage was almost empty. His footsteps echoed as he walked to his car. Nothing flashy, just a sensible dark blue sedan. He placed his briefcase carefully in the passenger seat, loosened his tie, and started the drive home. The streets were quiet at this hour. Judge Carter took the familiar route through downtown, past the small businesses now closed for the night, and onto the tree-lined avenue that would eventually lead to his neighborhood. His mind drifted to the complicated case he'd been studying, a dispute over environmental regulations that affected thousands of workers. The legal arguments were sound on both sides, but finding the balance between jobs and environmental protection wasn't straightforward. He was so lost in thought that he almost didn't notice the police cruiser that had appeared behind him. Lights suddenly flashing. Judge Carter checked his speedometer. He was going exactly the speed limit. He hadn't run any lights or made any illegal turns. Puzzled, he signaled and pulled over to the curb under a streetlight. The cruiser stopped behind him. Judge Carter did what he always did when pulled over, which truthfully hadn't happened in years. He turned off the engine, placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen, and waited. His heart rate quickened slightly, an old familiar feeling washing over him. In his rearview mirror, he could see the officer taking his time, speaking into his radio before finally opening his door. The beam of a flashlight swept across his back window as the officer approached. "Evening," the officer said, shining the light directly into Judge Carter's face. "License and registration. No explanation for the stop." "No, sir, just a demand." Judge Carter squinted against the bright light. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why I've been pulled over?" His voice remained calm and measured, the same tone he used in his courtroom. The officer, whose nameplate read Officer Daniels, was young, maybe early 30s, with close-cropped hair and a rigid posture. His expression hardened at the question. "I'll ask the questions here. License and registration now." Judge Carter nodded slowly. "I'm going to reach for my wallet in my inside jacket pocket, and then for my registration in the glove compartment." "Just hurry up," Officer Daniels replied, the flashlight beam unwavering. As Judge Carter carefully retrieved his license, he noticed Officer Daniels studying his car's interior with unusual scrutiny. The judge handed over his documentation. "This is your vehicle?" Officer Daniels asked, examining the license with raised eyebrows. "Yes, for about 5 years now." "And where are you coming from at this hour?" "The federal courthouse downtown. I'm a judge there and I was working late." A snort of disbelief. "A judge, huh? And I'm the police commissioner." Officer Daniels walked back to his cruiser, license and registration in hand. Judge Carter sat perfectly still, watching in his mirrors. This wasn't his first experience with this kind of treatment, but it had been a while. He thought those days might be behind him, especially in this city where he was relatively well known. Apparently not. When Officer Daniels returned, his attitude had shifted subtly. He handed back the documents with slightly less disdain. "Do you know why I pulled you over tonight?" Judge Carter shook his head. "No, officer, I don't. I was observing the speed limit and following all traffic laws." "Your left tail light is out," Officer Daniels said. This surprised Judge Carter. He was meticulous about vehicle maintenance. "That's strange. I had the car serviced last week." "Well, it's out now," Officer Daniels replied, though he didn't sound entirely convinced himself. "But while we're talking, have you had anything to drink tonight?" "No, nothing." "Any medications? Prescription drugs?" "No." Officer Daniels studied him. "Mind stepping out of the vehicle?" The request seemed unnecessary, but Judge Carter knew better than to argue. "May I ask why that's necessary?" "Just step out of the car, sir." The "sir" came out strained, almost sarcastic. Judge Carter took a deep breath. "All right." He unbuckled his seatbelt and slowly opened his door. As he stood on the quiet street, a cool breeze rustled the trees overhead. Officer Daniels seemed taken aback by Judge Carter's height. At 6'2", he towered over the younger man. "Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle," Officer Daniels instructed. "Officer, I don't believe that's necessary. I've given you no reason. Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle now." The officer's voice rose, his hand moving to rest on his holster. An approaching car slowed as it passed them, the driver watching with concern. Judge Carter felt a familiar knot in his stomach, the same one he'd felt countless times before becoming a judge, before the respect of his position sometimes, but not always, shielded him from these encounters. "Officer Daniels, I'm going to comply, but I want to understand the reason for this escalation." He turned slowly and placed his hands on the roof of his car. "Spread your feet." Judge Carter complied, as Officer Daniels began patting him down. The indignity of it burned, but he remained silent. This was happening on a well-lit street in a good neighborhood, to a federal judge in a business suit. He wondered what might have happened on a darker road, to someone without his credentials. As Officer Daniels continued the search, another police cruiser pulled up. An older officer stepped out, heavy-set with graying hair and the stripes of a sergeant on his uniform. "Everything all right here, Daniels?" The sergeant called. "Just a routine traffic stop, Sergeant Powell. Taillight out. Subject was acting suspicious." The sergeant approached, looking between Officer Daniels and Judge Carter with growing recognition in his eyes. "Judge Carter?" Sergeant Powell's tone changed immediately. "What's going on here?" Officer Daniels froze mid-search. "You know this man?" "This is Federal Judge Anthony Carter," Sergeant Powell said, his face flushing slightly. "One of the most respected judges in our district." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Judge Carter slowly lowered his hands and turned around. "Hello, Sergeant Powell," he said quietly. "Judge, I apologize for this misunderstanding." The sergeant shot a pointed look at Officer Daniels, who had taken a step back, his confident demeanor crumbling. "I was told my taillight was out," Judge Carter said, "though that surprises me." Sergeant Powell walked to the back of the car, examining the lights. "Both taillights are working perfectly, Judge." Officer Daniels' face reddened. "They must have... I thought I saw..." "Judge Carter, I'm deeply sorry for this inconvenience," Sergeant Powell said. "Officer Daniels is relatively new to our precinct." Judge Carter straightened his jacket, looking directly at Officer Daniels, whose eyes now avoided his. In that moment, he made a decision. He could file a complaint. He could make phone calls to the police chief, whom he knew personally. He could ensure this officer faced consequences, or he could try something different. "Officer Daniels," he said calmly, "I'd like to propose something unusual. This encounter could end in several ways, most of them unpleasant for one or both of us, but I'm wondering if you'd be willing to have a conversation instead." Both officers looked surprised. "A conversation?" Officer Daniels repeated, confusion evident in his voice. "Yes, there's a diner about 2 blocks from here. When your shift ends, I'd like to buy you a cup of coffee and talk. No recordings, no official complaints. Just a conversation between 2 people." Officer Daniels looked to his sergeant, clearly unsure how to respond to this unexpected turn. "The judge is offering you an opportunity, Daniels," Sergeant Powell said quietly. "One you don't deserve, if you ask me." Judge Carter retrieved a business card from his wallet and handed it to the stunned officer. "My cell number's on there. The diner's called Becky's Place. It's open 24 hours. I'll be there at midnight if you decide to come." He turned to get back in his car, then paused. "And, officer? I really was just driving home from work. Nothing more, nothing less. Think about what made you see something different." With that, Judge Carter got into his car and drove away, leaving Officer Daniels standing in the glow of the streetlight, holding a business card and facing a choice that could change the course of 2 lives. Becky's Place was nearly empty at midnight. The diner's neon sign cast a pink glow through the windows, illuminating the worn leather booths and checkerboard floor. Judge Carter sat in a corner booth, a mug of coffee warming his hands. He'd changed out of his suit into a sweater and jeans, looking more like a college professor than a federal judge. He checked his watch again. It had been an hour since the traffic stop. He wasn't sure Officer Daniels would show up, but something told him to wait a little longer. The bell above the door jingled. Officer Daniels stepped inside, still in uniform but without his hat. He hesitated at the entrance, scanning the diner until his eyes landed on Judge Carter. For a moment, it looked like he might turn around and leave. Instead, he walked over, his posture stiff. "Judge Carter," he said with a nod, his voice carrying none of the arrogance from earlier. "Officer Daniels, thanks for coming." Judge Carter gestured to the seat across from him. "Please sit down." Officer Daniels slid into the booth looking uncomfortable. A waitress approached, coffee pot in hand. "Can I get you something, officer?" she asked. "Just coffee, thank you," he replied. They sat in silence as she filled his cup and walked away. Officer Daniels stared at the steam rising from his mug. "I'm not sure why I'm here," he finally said. Judge Carter studied him. Up close, Officer Daniels looked younger than he'd first appeared. Maybe late 20s, not 30s. There were dark circles under his eyes. "I'm not sure either," Judge Carter admitted with a small smile, "but it seemed better than the alternatives." "Are you going to file a complaint?" Officer Daniels asked bluntly. "I haven't decided." Judge Carter took a sip of his coffee. "That depends partly on this conversation." Officer Daniels shifted in his seat. "Look, about what happened—" "Before we get to that," Judge Carter interrupted gently, "tell me something about yourself. How long have you been on the force?" The question seemed to throw Officer Daniels off balance. 3 years, he answered. "Transferred to this precinct 6 months ago." "Where were you before?" "East Side." "Rougher neighborhood," Judge Carter nodded. "And before becoming an officer?" "What did you do?" Officer Daniels frowned slightly, clearly wondering where this was going. "Military. 4 years, Army. Combat?" A tight nod. 2 tours in Afghanistan. Judge Carter let that sit between them for a moment. "That's not easy. Thank you for your service." Something in Officer Daniels's expression shifted, a slight softening around the eyes. "My brother served too," Judge Carter continued. "Different war, same struggles coming home. Is he okay?" Officer Daniels asked, the question seemingly automatic. "He had a rough time. Better now." Judge Carter set down his mug. "You know, I grew up not far from the East Side." "Really?" Surprise colored Officer Daniels' voice. "Pine Street Housing Project. My mother cleaned houses. My father worked 2 jobs. Factory during the day, security guard at night." Officer Daniels was watching him now, really seeing him perhaps for the first time. "How did you—" He stopped himself. "Become a judge?" Judge Carter smiled. "A teacher saw something in me. Pushed me to apply for scholarships. I worked my way through college, then law school. Public defender for 10 years after that." "Public defender? You defended criminals?" "I defended people who couldn't afford lawyers," Judge Carter corrected gently. "Some guilty, some innocent. All deserving of fair representation under the law." Officer Daniels looked down at his coffee. "Let me ask you something," Judge Carter said. "When you pulled me over tonight, what did you see?" The officer tensed. "A tail light? No," Judge Carter interrupted firmly but kindly. "We both know that wasn't true. Sergeant Powell confirmed it. I'm asking what you really saw when you decided to pull me over." The diner had emptied out. Even the waitress had disappeared into the back. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator case displaying pies. Officer Daniels swallowed hard. "I saw an expensive car moving slowly through a neighborhood where there had been break-ins recently." "And the driver?" Their eyes met across the table. "A black man," Officer Daniels admitted quietly. Judge Carter nodded. "Not a judge. Not a homeowner. Not someone coming from work. Just a black man in a car that seemed too nice." Officer Daniels didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. "What would have happened if Sergeant Powell hadn't shown up?" Judge Carter asked. "What was next in your plan?" "I would have searched your car," Officer Daniels said, his voice barely audible. "Looking for, I don't know, something. Something you assumed had to be there," Judge Carter finished for him. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. "I'm not a bad cop," Officer Daniels finally said, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. "I've never used excessive force. I follow procedures." "I believe you," Judge Carter said. "But tell me this, do you pull over middle-aged white women in SUVs with the same frequency? Do you search their cars looking for something?" Officer Daniels opened his mouth, then closed it. "I'm not trying to shame you," Judge Carter continued. "I'm trying to make a point about patterns and assumptions we might not even realize we're making." "It's not that simple," Officer Daniels argued. "In my experience, Your experience is limited, Judge Carter cut in, his voice firm but not unkind. And it's shaped by where you patrol, who you're told to watch, and yes, what you expect to find. Officer Daniels ran a hand over his face. So what, you're saying I'm racist? That's why I pulled you over? Judge Carter leaned forward. I'm saying we all carry biases. The question is whether we examine them or let them guide our actions unchecked. The waitress returned, offering more coffee. Both men declined. Can I tell you a story? Judge Carter asked after she left. Officer Daniels nodded, looking exhausted but attentive. My first day as a judge, I wore my best suit. Brand new robe. I was so proud. After the ceremony, I went to the judge's entrance of the courthouse. The security guard stopped me, told me service workers had to use the back entrance. Judge Carter smiled faintly at the memory. Even with the robe, he couldn't see me as a judge. What did you do? Officer Daniels asked. I showed him my credentials. He apologized, mortified. But here's the thing. I never saw that reaction as personal malice, just a reflection of what he'd been conditioned to expect. Officer Daniels seemed to be absorbing this, turning it over in his mind. Tonight, Judge Carter continued, you could have just given me a warning about a taillight that wasn't out. Instead, you escalated. You searched me on the side of the road. Why? The officer stared into his coffee for a long moment. Because once I started, I felt like I had to find something to justify the stop, he admitted. And because, he struggled with the next words. Because I didn't believe you were really a judge. Judge Carter nodded. Even when I told you? Even when you told me, Officer Daniels echoed, shame evident in his voice. Do you know what I do all day, Officer Daniels? I judge people. Not in the colloquial sense, it's literally my job title. I look at evidence, listen to testimony, and make decisions that affect lives. Judge Carter paused. But before I put on that robe each morning, I remind myself of one thing. I must see the person before me clearly, not through the lens of my assumptions. Officer Daniels looked up, meeting Judge Carter's gaze directly. I messed up tonight, he said simply. Yes, Judge Carter agreed. You did. The admission hung in the air between them. So what happens now? Officer Daniels asked. Are you going to report me? Judge Carter considered the man across from him. He saw fear there, defensiveness too, but also something else, a glimmer of genuine reflection. That depends, he said. What do you think should happen? Officer Daniels looked surprised by the question. He thought for a moment before answering. I should face consequences, he said finally, but I'd also like a chance to do better. Judge Carter nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. That's a start. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. There's a program starting next month. Community dialogues between officers and residents. They need participants from the force. Judge Carter tapped the card. This is the coordinator's contact information. Officer Daniels picked up the card, examining it. Why are you giving me a chance? He asked quietly. After what I did? Judge Carter stood, placing money on the table for their coffee. Because 30 years ago someone gave me one, he said simply. And because change has to start somewhere, he extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Officer Daniels stood and shook it. What you do next matters more than what you did tonight, Judge Carter said. Remember that. As he walked toward the door, Officer Daniels called after him. Judge Carter? I really am sorry. The judge paused, looking back. I know. Now prove it by doing something about it. Outside, the night air was cool against Judge Carter's face. As he walked to his car, he wondered if their conversation would make any difference. Maybe not. But he had to try. In his decades on the bench, he'd learned that justice wasn't just about punishment. Sometimes it was about creating the possibility for something better. 2 weeks had passed since the late-night conversation at Becky's place. Officer Daniels sat in his patrol car, parked outside the community center, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. The dashboard clock read 5:45 p.m. The meeting wouldn't start until 6:30, but he'd arrived early, partly from habit and partly from nerves. He'd almost talked himself out of coming 3 times today. What was he doing here? This wasn't mandatory training or a department requirement. No one would know if he just drove away. No one except Judge Carter. Officer Daniels hadn't seen the judge since that night at the diner, but their conversation had stayed with him, surfacing at unexpected moments during his shifts. Last week, he'd pulled over a teenager in a beat-up car with a broken taillight, an actual broken taillight, and found himself really looking at the kid, nervous, clutching a fast food uniform late for work. Daniels had written him a warning instead of a ticket and let him go with directions to a discount auto shop. It was a small thing, but it felt different somehow. The community center doors opened, and people began arriving for the meeting. Officer Daniels recognized a few faces: a store owner from his patrol route, a high school teacher, an elderly man who walked the same path through the park every morning. Regular people from the neighborhood. Taking a deep breath, he got out of his car. He'd come in civilian clothes, jeans and a button-down shirt, but he felt exposed without his uniform, without the authority it conveyed. As he approached the building, a woman held the door open for him. "Are you here for the community dialogue?" she asked with a warm smile. "Yes," he replied, surprised by her friendliness. "First time, me too. I'm Linda, I run the bookstore on Oak Street." "Tom," he said, using his first name instead of Officer Daniels for what felt like the first time in years. "I'm with the police department." If she was surprised, she didn't show it. "That's great. We need more officers involved in these conversations." The meeting room was arranged with chairs in a circle rather than rows. About 20 people milled around, helping themselves to coffee and cookies from a side table. Officer Daniels scanned the room for Judge Carter but didn't see him. A tall woman with gray-streaked hair clapped her hands for attention. "Let's get started, everyone. Find a seat. Anywhere is fine." Officer Daniels sat between Linda from the bookstore and an older man who introduced himself as Dr. Chen, a retired physician. Across the circle, he noticed a man in a police uniform, Officer Rodriguez from the downtown precinct. They nodded to each other in recognition. "Welcome to our first community dialogue session," the facilitator began. "I'm Dr. Watts, but please call me Patricia. The goal of these meetings is simple: to create space for honest conversation between community members and law enforcement. We're not here to point fingers or place blame. We're here to listen, learn, and perhaps find common ground." She explained the format: small group discussions, personal storytelling, ground rules about respect and confidentiality. Officer Daniels felt his anxiety ease slightly as she spoke. This wasn't so different from the conflict resolution training he'd had in the academy. "Let's start with a simple exercise," Patricia said. "Turn to the person next to you and share what brought you here tonight." Officer Daniels turned to Dr. Chen, who smiled encouragingly. "You first, young man." He hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I had an encounter recently that made me question some of my assumptions. I'm here to listen and maybe understand better." Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "That takes courage. I'm here because my grandson wants to be a police officer, but my son-in-law is worried about how the community will see him. I want to help bridge that gap if I can." The honesty in the older man's voice struck Officer Daniels. Before he could respond, Patricia called the group back together and asked for volunteers to share their reasons for coming. Several people spoke. A mother worried about her teenage sons being stopped by police. A store owner grateful for increased patrols after a robbery. Officer Rodriguez describing his desire to build trust in the neighborhood he served. Officer Daniels remained silent, listening. Then a new voice spoke from the doorway. "Sorry I'm late." Judge Carter stood there, briefcase in hand, looking just as he had at the diner, approachable, thoughtful, radiating quiet authority even in casual clothes. "Judge Carter, welcome," Patricia said. "We're just sharing what brought us here tonight." The judge took an empty seat in the circle. "What brought me here? A lifetime of experiences, both challenging and hopeful, and a recent conversation that reminded me how important it is to create spaces like this." His eyes met Officer Daniels across the room, and he nodded slightly in recognition. For the next hour, the group discussed perceptions of safety, fairness, and community. They broke into smaller groups to share personal stories. Officer Daniels found himself in a group with a high school teacher, a grandmother, and a young man who worked at the local grocery store. The teacher spoke about a student who'd been traumatized by watching his older brother arrested on their front lawn. The grandmother described calling the police for help during a medical emergency and being treated with compassion by the responding officers. The young man admitted avoiding eye contact with police whenever possible, just to be safe. When it was Officer Daniels' turn, he found himself saying, I became a cop to help people. But sometimes I wonder if that's really what I'm doing. They looked at him with surprise, not expecting such candor from an officer. What do you mean? The teacher asked gently. Officer Daniels thought carefully before answering. We're trained to look for threats, for problems. Sometimes I think that changes how you see everything. And everyone. The conversation continued, more openly now. By the time they rejoined the larger group, something had shifted. The initial awkwardness had given way to something else. Not agreement. Exactly, but a willingness to listen. As the meeting wound down, Patricia handed out feedback forms and announced the next session's date. This is just the beginning of the conversation, she said. Real change takes time and consistent effort from all sides. People began gathering their things and chatting in small groups. Officer Daniels saw Judge Carter speaking with Patricia by the door. He hesitated, then walked over. Judge Carter, the judge turned, a smile warming his face. Officer Daniels, I'm glad you came. You didn't tell me you'd be here, Officer Daniels said. Would it have made a difference? Officer Daniels considered this. Maybe, I'm not sure. Judge Carter nodded. That's an honest answer. Patricia excused herself to speak with other participants, leaving them alone. What did you think? The judge asked. It was not what I expected, Officer Daniels admitted. People were pretty open. Not as angry as I thought they'd be. Anger usually comes from feeling unheard, Judge Carter observed. This is a space where people feel listened to. They walked together toward the parking lot. The evening air was cool, streetlights just beginning to come on. You know, Officer Daniels said, I watched the body cam footage from that night. From when I pulled you over. Judge Carter looked at him with interest. And? I didn't like what I saw, he said simply. The way I spoke to you, the assumptions I made. It wasn't good policing. No, Judge Carter agreed. It wasn't. I've been thinking about what you said at the diner, about seeing people clearly, not through the lens of assumptions. Officer Daniels stopped walking, turning to face the judge. I want to do better. I'm just not sure how. Judge Carter considered him thoughtfully. Recognition is the first step. Being here tonight was another. The rest is practice, conscious, deliberate practice in seeing people as individuals. Is it that simple? Simple, yes, easy. Judge Carter smiled slightly. Nothing worthwhile ever is. They reached the parking lot. Officer Daniels' patrol car sat a few spaces away from Judge Carter's sedan. Will you be at the next meeting? Officer Daniels asked. I plan to be. You? Yeah, he said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. I'll be here. As they prepared to go their separate ways, Officer Daniels found himself wanting to say more, to explain how the past 2 weeks had left him questioning things he'd long taken for granted. But the words wouldn't come easily. Instead, he simply said, thank you, for not filing a complaint that night, for suggesting coffee instead. Judge Carter studied him for a moment. You know, Officer Daniels, in my courtroom I see people at their worst moments. After mistakes have been made, when it's often too late for anything but consequences. It's rare I get to see what happens when someone chooses a different path before reaching that point. He extended his hand, and Officer Daniels shook it. See you in 2 weeks, the judge said. Yes, sir. You will. As he drove home that night, Officer Daniels found himself noticing things differently. The teenager waiting at the bus stop, the elderly couple walking their dog, the man locking up his shop. Not as potential problems or statistics, but as people with their own stories, their own lives. It was a small shift, hardly noticeable to anyone but himself. But it felt like the beginning of something important. 3 months had passed since the first community dialogue meeting. The summer heat had given way to crisp autumn air. Leaves crunched under Officer Daniels' boots as he walked the beat in the neighborhood he'd once only driven through with his windows up. Morning, Officer Tom, called Mrs. Washington from her porch, where she was sweeping fallen leaves. At 78, she was the unofficial eyes and ears of the block. Morning, Mrs. Washington. How's that grandson of yours doing at college? She beamed with pride. Made Dean's List his first semester. That boy always was smart. 6 months ago, Officer Daniels wouldn't have known Mrs. Washington's name, let alone asked about her grandson, but things had changed. He'd attended every community dialogue meeting, eventually becoming one of the program's most vocal supporters within the department. It hadn't been easy. Some of his fellow officers kept their distance when word got around about his involvement. Others made comments under their breath about playing community social worker instead of doing real police work. But Officer Rodriguez from downtown had joined him, and gradually a few more officers had come to meetings. 2. Officer Daniels checked his watch. He had an hour before he needed to head back to the station for his shift change. Enough time to stop by the high school. The hallways were bustling with students changing classes when he arrived. Many nodded in recognition as he made his way to the principal's office. This too was new, visiting the school not to arrest someone or respond to an incident, but as part of community outreach. Principal Torres looked up from her desk when he knocked. "Officer Daniels, right on time. The students are excited about your talk next week." "I'm a little nervous, to be honest," he admitted. "Public speaking isn't really my thing." She smiled. "Just tell your story. That's what they need to hear. His story." It still felt strange to think of his journey that way. But that's what it had become. A story of change that had somehow gained attention beyond their small community. It had started with an article in the local newspaper about the dialogue program. A reporter had attended one of the sessions and been struck by the unusual sight of officers and community members engaged in genuine conversation. She'd interviewed several participants, including Officer Daniels and Judge Carter. The article might have been forgotten if not for what happened next. A video surfaced online of an officer in a nearby city, roughly handling a young black man during a traffic stop. The incident sparked outrage and protests. In the midst of the turmoil, someone remembered the article and shared it on social media as an example of a different approach. Suddenly, their small dialogue program was being discussed on news shows and podcasts. Judge Carter had been invited to speak about it at a conference on criminal justice reform. And Officer Daniels found himself fielding calls from officers in other cities asking how the program worked. His captain had called him into his office about a month ago. "You've become the poster boy for community policing, Daniels," the captain had said, not unkindly. "How do you feel about that?" "Uncomfortable," Officer Daniels had answered honestly. "I'm not some success story. I'm still figuring things out," the captain had nodded. "That's exactly why people are listening. You're not claiming to have all the answers." As Officer Daniels left the high school, his phone buzzed with a text message from Judge Carter. "Still on for coffee today?" Their late-night diner meeting had evolved into a regular catch-up session, usually at a coffee shop halfway between the courthouse and the police station. Officer Daniels typed back a quick confirmation and headed that way. Judge Carter was already there when he arrived, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed some papers. He looked up and smiled as Officer Daniels approached. "How's patrol today?" the judge asked as Officer Daniels sat down. "Quiet. Helped a lost kid find his mom at the park. Gave directions to some tourists. Nothing exciting. Sometimes boring is good in your line of work," Judge Carter observed. "True enough." Officer Daniels accepted the coffee the judge had already ordered for him. Black with 1 sugar, just how he liked it. How was court? Challenging case. 2 good people on opposite sides of a dispute, both convinced they're right. Judge Carter sighed. "Those are always the hardest ones." They fell into easy conversation, the initial awkwardness of their relationship long since faded. They didn't always agree, they still came from different worlds in many ways, but they had learned to listen to each other. "I got a call from the police chief in Riverdale yesterday," Judge Carter mentioned. "They're interested in starting a dialogue program of their own." Officer Daniels nodded. "I heard from one of their sergeants last week. Gave him some pointers on getting officers to participate." "And what did you tell him?" "That it has to be voluntary. The minute you force officers to attend, it becomes just another box to check." Officer Daniels stirred his coffee thoughtfully, and that they need to be prepared for uncomfortable conversations. "No sugarcoating," Judge Carter smiled. "You've come a long way from that night at Becky's place." "Have I?" Officer Daniels wondered aloud. "Sometimes I feel like I've barely scratched the surface." "That's how growth works," Judge Carter said. "The more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know." Officer Daniels' phone buzzed, a text from dispatch. His face grew serious as he read it. "I have to go. Possible domestic situation on Elm Street." Judge Carter nodded in understanding. "Be careful." Officer Daniels was halfway to the door when he turned back. "Judge, thank you. For everything." "Don't thank me yet," Judge Carter called after him. "We still have work to do." The situation on Elm Street turned out to be a loud argument between roommates resolved without arrests. By the time Officer Daniels finished his paperwork and ended his shift, it was past sundown. He was walking to his car in the station parking lot when a voice called his name. He turned to see Chief Brooks approaching. "Got a minute, Daniels?" "Yes, sir." The chief was a 25-year veteran, old school in many ways, but fair. He'd been quietly supportive of the dialogue program without actively promoting it. "Walk with me," the chief said, and they fell into step together. "I've been watching you these past few months." Officer Daniels waited, unsure where this was going. "When you first transferred here, you were by the book. High number of stops and citations. Good arrest record." The chief glanced at him. "But something changed." "Yes, sir, it did. Your arrest numbers are down." Officer Daniels tensed slightly. "They are. But complaints against you have dropped to 0. Community feedback is positive. Officers who patrol with you report better interactions with the public." The chief stopped walking. "Care to explain?" Officer Daniels thought carefully before answering. "I'm policing differently, sir. Trying to see the neighborhood as a community I'm part of, not just a sector I patrol." The chief studied him. "There's talk about expanding the dialogue program, making it department-wide. Voluntary participation is key, sir. So I've heard. Which is why I'm asking if you'd consider taking a more formal role, training new officers, coordinating with community leaders." The chief held up a hand as Officer Daniels started to respond. "Not full-time. You'd still patrol, but we'd reduce your hours to make room for the new responsibilities." Officer Daniels was stunned. "I'm not sure I'm qualified, sir." "Nobody is," the chief said bluntly. "This is new territory. But you've earned trust on both sides. That's rare and valuable. Can I think about it? Take the weekend. Let me know Monday." The chief turned to go, then paused. "One more thing. That incident with Judge Carter a few months back." Officer Daniels' stomach tightened. Despite everything that had happened since, he still felt shame when he thought about that night. "The judge never filed a complaint," the chief continued. "But the dashboard camera and body cam footage were automatically uploaded to our system." "I know, sir. I watched them recently." "Compared them to your most recent stops?" The chief's expression was unreadable. "Night and day difference, Daniels. Whatever happened between then and now. Good work." With that, he walked away, leaving Officer Daniels standing alone in the parking lot. That night, unable to sleep, Officer Daniels pulled out the business card Judge Carter had given him at the diner months ago. The edges were worn from being carried in his wallet. He turned it over in his hands, thinking about how differently things might have gone if the judge had simply filed a complaint that night. He would have faced disciplinary action, probably been defensive about it, maybe even quit the force with his resentment intact. Instead, here he was, being asked to help reshape how the department approached community relations, all because someone had seen him clearly, not just his actions that night, but his potential to change. His phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Heard you might be taking on a new role. The dialogue program needs officers like you. Think about it. Patricia from the community center." Word traveled fast. Officer Daniels found himself smiling as he texted back, still deciding but leaning toward yes. He had a feeling Judge Carter already knew about the chief's offer. The judge seemed to have a way of knowing these things, of quietly setting events in motion and then stepping back to let them unfold. Tomorrow, he'd call and tell him anyway. Maybe suggest lunch instead of their usual coffee. After all, they had a lot to talk about. Not just about the past, but about what came next. 1 year had passed since that fateful traffic stop. The community center was packed for the anniversary celebration of the dialogue program. Folding chairs filled the main room, with people standing against the walls when the seats ran out. Local news cameras were set up in the back and a table of refreshments lined one wall. Officer Daniels, now Sergeant Daniels following his recent promotion, adjusted his tie nervously backstage. He wasn't in uniform tonight. This wasn't police business, not officially. This was personal. Nervous? Judge Carter appeared beside him, looking distinguished in a dark blue suit. "Terrified," Sergeant Daniels admitted with a small laugh. "Public speaking still isn't my thing." "Just speak from the heart," Judge Carter advised. "That's all anyone out there wants to hear." Patricia from the community center poked her head through the curtain. "We're ready for you both." They walked out together to applause. The audience was a mix of people, community members, police officers, local officials, and reporters. Sergeant Daniels recognized many faces. Mrs. Washington from his beat, Principal Torres from the high school, Dr. Chen, who'd been in his first dialogue group, and dozens of others he'd met through the program. His fellow officers were scattered throughout the crowd, including Chief Brooks in the front row. Patricia stepped up to the microphone first. A year ago, we started with 20 people in a circle, wondering if we could really talk to each other. Today, over 500 people have participated in our dialogue sessions. We've expanded to 3 locations across the city, and similar programs have started in 12 other communities. She smiled warmly. None of this would have happened without our 2 founders who are here to share their story. Judge Carter spoke first, his deep voice calm and measured. He talked about the history of the program, the challenges they'd faced, and the progress they'd made. He shared statistics: complaints against officers down 40%, community satisfaction up 60%, improved response times as officers gained better knowledge of neighborhood layouts and residents. But numbers only tell part of the story, Judge Carter concluded. For the human side of it, I'd like to introduce Sergeant Tom Daniels. As Judge Carter stepped back, Sergeant Daniels moved to the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces watching him expectantly and took a deep breath. A year ago, I pulled over a car for a broken taillight that wasn't actually broken. His voice was steady despite his nerves. I was looking for trouble because of what and who I expected to find behind the wheel. Instead, I found Judge Anthony Carter. A murmur went through the audience. Though many knew parts of this story, few had heard it directly from him. I could stand here and tell you I was having a bad day, or that I was just being cautious because of recent break-ins in the area. I could make excuses. Sergeant Daniels shook his head, but the truth is simpler and harder to admit. I saw a black man in a nice car and made assumptions. Assumptions that led me to abuse my authority and violate the trust placed in me as an officer. The room was completely silent now. What happened next changed everything. Instead of filing a complaint against me, which he had every right to do, Judge Carter invited me to talk. Just talk, and more importantly, to listen. Sergeant Daniels looked over at the judge. That conversation could have ended with coffee cups and awkward goodbyes. Instead, it grew into this program that's changing how police and communities interact across the country. He went on to describe his journey over the past year, the initial resistance from fellow officers, the uncomfortable realizations about his own biases, the gradual shift in how he approached his work, and finally, his new role training other officers in community engagement. I'm still learning, he admitted, every day, and I still make mistakes. But now I understand that good policing isn't measured by the number of arrests or citations. It's measured by whether people in the community feel safer, more respected, and better served. He gestured toward the audience. This program works because it's honest. We don't pretend that centuries of mistrust can be erased overnight. We don't claim to have all the answers. What we do is create space for real conversations, sometimes difficult ones, where everyone's humanity is recognized. As he spoke, he noticed a young officer in the back of the room listening intently. Officer Jenkins had joined the force just 6 months ago and reminded Sergeant Daniels of himself at that age. Eager, a bit rigid, convinced he knew what good policing looked like. A year ago, I wouldn't have believed any of this was possible, Sergeant Daniels continued. I was sure I was doing my job the right way, that the problem was everyone else. It took one traffic stop and one judge willing to see me as more than my worst moment to show me a different path. He stepped back from the microphone, and Judge Carter moved forward again. Together, they took questions from the audience about the program's future, challenges they'd faced, and lessons they'd learned. A reporter raised her hand. There's been talk about expanding this program nationally. Would you be involved in that effort? Judge Carter glanced at Sergeant Daniels before answering. We've been approached by several organizations about sharing our model. While we're happy to provide guidance, we believe programs like this work best when they grow organically within communities, shaped by local needs and voices. Sergeant Daniels nodded in agreement. You can't just copy and paste it. Each community has its own history, its own challenges. What works here might need adjustments elsewhere. As the formal presentation ended and people mingled over refreshments, Sergeant Daniels found himself approached by Officer Jenkins, the young officer he'd noticed earlier. Sergeant, can I ask you something? Officer Jenkins looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Of course. How did you know? I mean, how did you realize you needed to change? The question caught Sergeant Daniels off guard with its directness and honesty. I didn't at first, he admitted. I was defensive, sure I was in the right. It took seeing myself through someone else's eyes, watching that body cam footage, hearing how Judge Carter experienced that stop, to understand what I was really doing. Officer Jenkins nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about some of my stops lately, wondering if I'm... He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. If you're making the same assumptions I did? Sergeant Daniels finished for him. The fact that you're asking yourself that question is already a step in the right direction. Across the room, Judge Carter was deep in conversation with the mayor and police chief. He caught Sergeant Daniels' eye and gave a subtle nod of encouragement. After Officer Jenkins moved on, Mrs. Washington approached, her grandson beside her. The young man, home from college for the weekend, extended his hand to Sergeant Daniels. I want to thank you, he said. Last summer, before I left for school, I was afraid every time I saw a police car in our neighborhood. Now when I come home to visit, it feels different. Before Sergeant Daniels could respond, he was called away to speak with a visitor from out of town, the police chief from Riverdale, who had implemented their own version of the dialogue program 6 months earlier. The evening continued like this, conversations flowing, connections forming. What had started with 2 men in a diner had grown into something neither of them could have imagined. As the event wound down, Sergeant Daniels found himself standing beside Judge Carter near the exit, watching the last guest depart. Did you ever imagine this? Sergeant Daniels asked, gesturing to the room and all it represented. Judge Carter smiled. Not specifically, but I've always believed in the possibility of change both in systems and in people. Even that night when you pulled me over? Especially then, the judge replied. Though I admit there were moments during that stop when my faith was tested. They both laughed, able now to find humor in what had once been a tense and potentially dangerous encounter. Outside, the night was clear, stars visible despite the city lights. They walked to their cars in companionable silence. My daughter's school play is next weekend, Sergeant Daniels said as they reached the parking lot. She's playing the tree in the background, but she's very excited about it. My wife and I wondered if you'd like to join us. Judge Carter looked surprised and touched by the invitation. I'd be honored. This perhaps was the most meaningful change of all. Not the programs or the statistics or the news coverage, but the genuine friendship that had formed between 2 men who might otherwise have remained on opposite sides of a deep divide. As they prepared to go their separate ways, a police cruiser drove slowly through the lot. The officer inside, a veteran Sergeant Daniels had known for years, raised his hand in greeting to both men. Progress, Judge Carter observed. Small steps, Sergeant Daniels agreed. The only kind that last, the judge said with a smile. They shook hands. No longer the cautious grip of strangers, but the warm clasp of friends who had walked a difficult path together and found themselves changed by the journey. Driving home, Sergeant Daniels thought about how differently things might have turned out. One decision, Judge Carter's choice to suggest coffee instead of filing a complaint, his own choice to show up at that diner, had altered the course of countless lives, including his own. He stopped at a red light and noticed a car beside him, a teenager behind the wheel looking nervously at his police car. Sergeant Daniels smiled and waved. After a moment's hesitation, the teen waved back, small steps, but in the right direction.